Hi, I'm going to talk to you today about Chapter 1. Normally, we'll be having these discussions in class, and hopefully you would be able to ask questions while we're having these discussions. But this particular week, I have to be at an accounting conference, so I'm going to record this for you, and hopefully it will help you understand the chapter a little better. And we can always talk about things on Monday if there's some confusion. So basically, I'm going to go through the PowerPoint for Chapter 1. And Chapter 1 PowerPoint is out here in Blackboard. Chapter 1 itself is in Blackboard, so if you don't have the book yet, you can read through it as we go through the PowerPoint. It pretty much follows the chapter. But you will need to get that textbook. I'm not going to scan all the chapters and put them up there, but for this first chapter, I'll put that up there. So we're going to talk about Chapter 1, and the PowerPoint is in Blackboard. And you can follow along. You might want to have the book out because the book pretty much follows along also with the PowerPoint. Alright, so Chapter 1, Ethical Reasoning, Implications for Accounting. So the whole point of this class is to start using reason, right, our critical thinking skills when it comes to ethical situations in accounting. Now obviously we're going to go through many chapters that point out specific accounting rules, that talk about philosophy. We'll discuss a lot of cases. But the point is, by the time we're done with class, we'll have some tools to apply and we'll be able to come to ethical decisions whenever a question arises in the area of ethics. Alright, so for this first chapter, I don't want you to read the very first page. Alright, so don't read any of this shaded in part. And don't read any of this shaded in part. I think it doesn't have anything at all to do with accounting, and I think we can understand ethical reasoning with maybe a different example, right? So the point of that example that we're going to skip is that sometimes it's possible for people to have ethical lapses. Something is very, very wrong and should never be done, but sometimes people let other people get away with things. Sometimes things just happen in the culture of where you are. I like to think about maybe some of the Wall Street things you hear about. Certainly some examples where why would anybody ever think that was an okay thing to do, right? Bernie Madoff, for example. But I think sometimes people get caught up in the culture, people get caught up in their own self-interest, and we end up having huge moral lapses. So hopefully none of us will have to deal with anything like that. But the point of this first bit of the chapter is to get us thinking about ethical reasoning. I think we all have a pretty good idea of who we want to be, right? I want to be a kind, ethical, honest, trustworthy person with integrity. And sometimes, for some reason, maybe I'm not always that. And I want to be that, but I'm not always. Hopefully I'm getting better at it, but I'm not always. So, sometimes we're going to have blind spots, and what happens is, in this class, we're going to start trying to think of a way to think about being ethical, right? If we follow a pattern, if we follow a way to be ethical, that will sort of help us prevent falling into these blind spots. Unfortunately, organizational goals, businesses are very easy places to fall into being unethical. You know, oh, we just are going to fudge these numbers this one month. Oh, I'm auditing this organization, and if I give them a bad audit, I'm not going to get their business anymore. So pressures contribute to ethical fading. And in this class, we're going to try to understand how to think about ethical situations and dilemmas in ways that will prevent blind spots and prevent ethical fading. Ethics in accounting means having integrity, right? We act on principles, not just what we want. We are going to learn about integrity going all the way back to Greek philosophers. We're going to go back to religions, to virtue ethics. We're going to learn about how people have integrity, which basically means act on principle, not necessarily what I want for me. Being ethical. All right, accountants have to have ethics. As we'll learn a little bit further in the chapter, the whole point of being an accountant is to serve the public. And if an accountant doesn't have integrity, they can't be trusted, and there's no point for an accountant who doesn't have ethics and integrity to even be hired. As you continue through the book, on page 4, talks a little bit about the religious foundation of ethics. So at the top of page 5, there's a nice chart that lists, I guess I would call it the main religions of the world, although certainly there are many other religions that are out there. But the main world religions all have some sort of version of the golden rule. Right? There seems to be this certain core philosophical foundation that is embedded in the golden rule. Do to others as you want to be done to you, or don't do to others if you don't want that done to you. So there's a sort of basic recognition of duties and rights, justice and fairness. The real principles of ethics are found in that golden rule, and it appears throughout civilizations, throughout time. So clearly there is some sort of ethical, fundamental, basic level for all of us, regardless of culture, really. This idea that people should be ethical or can act ethical goes back to philosophy. We aren't going to touch on philosophy a whole lot in this class, a little bit in this chapter. So if you've taken Intro to Philosophy class, you're probably well ahead of what we would talk about in this chapter. So back in ancient Greece, the Greeks believed that the goal of life was to have some sort of happiness and live a life of excellence. So where do ethics come from, right? Well, ethics are accepted standards of behavior which may come from a profession. So this class, of course, is about accounting ethics. So clearly we're going to talk a lot about the practices of accounting, both auditing, private industry accounting, and tax accounting, all different kinds of accounting in this class. But certainly we are part of a profession, and there are certainly practices that define ethics. There are laws that we can use to ascertain what's ethical. And certainly society has certain expectations of our behavior. So frequently society imposes ethics on us. Ethics comes from Greek, and certainly they were the first philosophers to start thinking about this concept of right and wrong, right? How people should act. Morals deals with manners and characters. Ethics and morals are more or less the same. And values are basic fundamental beliefs that guide or motivate attitudes or actions. Right? So understand this distinction between norms, values, and the law. So norms is not to say this is what people normally do. It's not descriptive. Norms are what people should do, how they should act. Right? So we might say, don't lie. That's a norm. Right? Or as we know, people lie. Right? Values. Values are basic beliefs. Right? So the golden rule is a basic belief. And law, I think we all know the law. Specific rules that are created. And when we talk about law, that's sort of the minimum set of standards. Right? I mean, certainly we all know there are many laws out there that don't have a lot to do with being ethical. Right? A speed limit. Yeah, right? But certainly there are also things the law allows that are unethical. So if you tell your significant other you went to the library and really you went to the bar, that you're not going to get arrested for that. You're not even going to get a ticket. But certainly that's probably unethical. Certainly in our culture that would be unethical. So norms describe how people should act. Values, they're those feelings that motivate how we should behave, what we want. The law, the rules. All right? So frequently there are going to be gray areas. Right? Something's unclear, especially under the law. Right? So we have some established behaviors, we have some rules. That is really, when it's a gray area, that is when our ethics come into play. Right? Because anybody can follow the law, right? But say there's a gray area, say there's a conflict. Now what do I do? Ethical people take action not in one's best interest, look beyond self-interest, and then decide on to follow a course of action by a process. More important than the end goal. So this process, that's going to become very important to us throughout this whole chapter, throughout the whole course. We're going to be discussing how to think about an ethical decision. What rules can we apply? All right, so we kind of are taking this self-interest out of it and start applying a process. All right. But to learn how to apply processes, we do need to go back to the beginning and understand how these processes came about. We need to understand how other people think about ethical processes. So let's talk about some things like ethical relativism. All right, so this is a theory that says morality is relative to one's culture. Right? So what's ethical for me in my culture, which is, current day United States, middle class America kind of thing, may not actually be similar to the morals of a different culture, right? Another country, another time, a different religion. So morality is relative to the norm of one culture comes from this theory of ethical relativism. Now, if this is true, there wouldn't be a common framework to resolve moral disputes. Most ethicists reject this theory, right? Because clearly we all agree on this golden rule. There are certainly components across society that people are going to agree to. So people differ in their application of fundamental moral principles, but agree on the principles, right? So the principle is what's important here, but how I and my culture might apply that is going to be different. Situation ethics, this comes up, right? So situational ethics is this idea that, there's principles, But do I really have to apply them all the time? I mean, sometimes in this one certain situation, maybe it's okay to do this thing that's wrong. So when we think about cheating, right? Well, cheating in a class is wrong. We say it's wrong, all right? But you know what? Suppose the professor wasn't there and she just made a video. And she didn't do a very good job of describing situation ethics, and now you have to take a test on situation ethics. Well, in that situation, maybe it's kind of okay to cheat a little bit, right? I can rationalize that she didn't teach me what she was supposed to teach me. I can say, well, it's just 1 point on one question in one test in one class, right? It's just not very important, right? So situations can influence us to go ahead and rationalize some action we shouldn't do. So most people kind of agree that situation ethics is not really going to be part of our ethical process that we're going to be picking up from this class. Now, this idea from the book, all right, so if we move on, if you're following in the book, we're on page 10 talking about cultural values. We say that you can't apply relative, here we talk ethical relativism, right? And we can't do that, but some different dimensions explain similarities and differences, right? While we all agree that it's important to be honest, let's say across all cultures, you have to be able to trust people. And while we agree that honesty is an important dimension of trustworthiness, different cultures have different applications of different values. So, Hofstede came up with these worldwide cultural dimensions that people display in different amounts, right? So some cultures are highly individualistic, right? And some have short power distance or high power distance. Some like to avoid uncertainty. There's this cultural value of masculinity, and long-term orientation is another addition to the list. So what Hofstede is trying to say with these cultural values is that in some places, typically in the United States, we think of individualism as being a really important cultural dimension, right? I do things for myself, maybe my family, right? I don't ask for a lot of help. I don't want to, I'm on my own. I'm doing for me. People like that maverick mentality, right? In some cultures, they are more collectivist, right? So they're not as individual. They try to do things for and with the group, right? So you can imagine working at a company in a country where they're very collectivist. So everybody's kind of like all for one. They might cover things up as a group, whereas an individual might whistleblow, right? Like, I don't want to get in trouble for what that guy did. Power distance will affect how likely people are to accept what the boss says or go against what the boss says. Uncertainty avoidance, right? Some people are okay with risk, some people are not. And this idea of masculinity, I suppose, we could certainly discuss characteristics of masculinity, but this idea that, well, I guess I would say, we might, in South Texas, we might call it being macho, and people want to reflect that or don't want to reflect that, and that's going to impact how they act at the workplace. Same thing with long-term orientation. Am I only at my job for today, or do I want to work at my job for the next 50 years till I retire? Right? How I perceive my orientation is going to make a difference on how I behave when there's an ethical dilemma. All right. Another concept, another theory about ethics is that there are virtues, right? We have these pillars of character, right? Back in Aristotelian days, Aristotle and Plato, they talked about virtue ethics. So, virtue ethics, or pillars of character, if you will, mean that if I am a certain person, a certain kind of a person, I am a virtuous person, therefore I display these characteristics, my choices are going to be moral, ethical choices, right? If I'm trustworthy, if I respect others, if I'm responsible, if I'm fair, caring, I'm a good citizen, a person who has those characteristics will be making good choices because they're behaving in a way that displays these 6 pillars of character, right? And I think we can agree that these are pretty good ways to be, right? Let's drill down a little bit on trustworthiness. All right, trustworthiness has several dimensions to it. I think we all know what it means to trust somebody else, right? I can leave my children or my pets with them and I know everything will be fine. I can let them do the bookkeeping for me and I know they won't steal. I can ask them a question, they'll tell me the truth. I believe this person, I trust this person. So trustworthy is honest, integrity, reliable, loyalty. It cuts across several dimensions. So trustworthiness embodies honesty, integrity, reliability, and loyalty. Right? So honesty is expressing the truth without deception. Right? So we all know it's possible to deceive without telling a lie. So honesty is not the same thing as not lying. It's not deceiving. Integrity, strength, and courage of one's convictions. So if I believe something, I act on it. I don't just... If I believe it's wrong to inflate the financial statements, and I see somebody is doing something wrong in the financial statements, not only do I tell them, hey, don't do that, I would act on my conviction. I wouldn't just look the other way. Reliability, I do what I say I'm going to do. I think we know that one. Loyalty, not violating confidence placed in us. Right? So loyalty is important to a certain extent. Loyalty is not more important than the truth. Alright? So loyalty should not take precedence over other values. Yeah, should you be loyal to your friends? Should you blow off a friend because you have a chance to do something that you prefer to do without that friend? Do you just dump a friend for no reason? Do you sell out your boss to the competitors? No, you should be loyal. However, when loyalty gets in the way of other virtues, right, like honesty, then loyalty has to come second. What I mean by that is, I used to work for financial institutions. Now, I was pretty lucky everywhere I worked. Everybody was pretty much straight arrows. But suppose they weren't. Suppose one day the CFO came to me and said, hey, we're not going to make our numbers this quarter, so I'm going to capitalize a few of these expenses, and we'll just expense them out next quarter. It'll be fine. We're just having this temporary problem. Right? So I really liked my CFO. She's a good gal. We've worked together a long time. I know she's a good person. I know the only reason she's doing this is so that nobody loses their job and the stockholders don't lose value in their stock. I mean, she's not even doing it for herself. She doesn't even get a bonus. But I still can't allow her to fudge the books, no matter how much I like her, even if her reasoning is good. So loyalty does not take precedence over other values. I think this means you're supposed to be a cat person, loyal to the master, while cats are loyal to the house. So yes, I like my boss a lot or my friend a lot, but I can't let that override what's supposed to be done for the good of everybody. So further with this pillars of character, trustworthy, all of these dimensions, honesty, integrity, reliability, and loyalty. The next pillar, respect, treating everyone with dignity. The word is used in exactly the sense you would take it in the normal way, you know, decent, tolerant, accept. Responsibility. Responsibility, I like this. The ability to reflect on alternative courses, persevere, and carry out the moral action diligently. This is a big part, not just of the pillars of character, but once we get down to the end of the class and we've learned our process and we start thinking about where's our moral gap? How come sometimes people want to be moral? I don't think there are very many people. I think there's some people, but not a lot of people would say, yes, I would like to be unethical, I don't care. I think most people want to be decent human beings. But where does that gap come in? Well, it's here. This perseverance to carry it out. It's like, I want to be good, but oh my gosh, that's going to be a lot of trouble. I could lose my job, you know. Responsibility. The ability to reflect on alternative courses, persevere, and carry out the moral action. And fairness. Again, this word is used in its typical meaning, treating others equally, impartially, you're not being judgmental, your own personal feelings about a situation don't come into play. So in the future someday, you'll be a boss, you'll be a manager, you'll be doing somebody's employment evaluation. Maybe you don't like that person very much. Maybe they have a personality that doesn't agree with yours. Maybe they're just something that just doesn't work for you. But you're evaluating them on their job description. So to be fair, what's their job? Do they do their job, right? Not do you like them, are they friendly, do you play golf with them? What's their job? Do they do their job? So fairness is the standard of justice without one's own feelings or inclination. I think we all appreciate fairness. Caring. This is going to be important. So this is an important pillar of character. And it's going to be important in our class because caring is the ability to understand, be sensitive to, and care about the feelings of other. Now, in this class, frequently, we're going to be talking about the various stakeholders, right? So when you write up your case outline this weekend for the case on Monday, 1.1, one of the things you'll be asked to do is list 2 stakeholders. Well, in order to list stakeholders and think about an ethical dilemma from different stakeholders' perspectives, that requires empathy, right? So if you're going to look at more than one side of an ethical dilemma, you have to put yourself in the shoes of everybody that's going to be affected, right? So caring, that's an important pillar of character. And citizenship, right? So none of our actions take place in a vacuum. We're all part of a society, right? So citizenship includes our civic virtues and duties, and being a good citizen means I am going to think about the civilization, the neighborhood, the city, the state, where I live, and I'm going to be a good citizen, whatever that means. Be informed, volunteer, vote. All right. A little word about reputation. So we understand these pillars of character, right? And we know, we kind of understand what they are and why they would be desirable character traits, certainly. Talk a little bit here about reputation. All right, so let's suppose you do have a great character. You follow the 6 pillars. Maybe you follow the ethics of your culture, whatever that is, and you've developed for your culture, for your profession, right? For accounting, right? So you're a good accountant, and you have a reputation as having integrity and being trustworthy. That's important, but so important for accounting. All right? If accountants aren't perceived as having a good reputation, they won't be hired. All right? You will not have a job in accounting. Takes a long time to build a reputation, but not long at all to tear it down. And I think we can all think of instances where somebody did something stupid and got a bad reputation from it. I want to talk a little bit about accounting and the public interest. All right. I know this is kind of an interesting concept, and you've probably thought about it on some level before, but the point of accounting is to benefit society. Most people don't know very much about accounting. However, their lives depend quite a bit on their company staying in business. If they want to retire, their investments need to make them money. The economy relies on financial statements being accurate. So accounting is something that the entire public is interested in. All right? So people who work for a company, even though you're the CFO or you're the controller, if you have an element of accounting, you have to honor the public trust, right? Because they're going to rely on those financial statements. So whenever financial statements are involved, you have a public interest, even though you don't work for a public. You're not even a public accountant. You're just the controller at a private company. It's not even a public company. But banks are lending money to that private company. People are going to work there every day, assuming their paycheck will be there at the end of the week. Vendors are giving that company credit so that they can stock their merchandise. So many people are depending on the accounting being correct. Even tax accounting, right? You're a tax accountant and you think, well, I work for my client. I'll help my client cheat on his taxes because, well, that client's paying me, not Uncle Sam. But tax accounting is in the public interest. If somebody cheats on their taxes, other people are going to have to pay to make up for it. So all dimensions of accounting are in the public interest, right? So all accountants, no matter what you are, yes, you're working for your boss and you're preparing those financial statements, you're writing checks, you're doing the taxes, whatever you're doing. You have to act with integrity. You have to be independent of your client. Your client can't tell you, don't report that misstatement in your audit, right? You have to be independent of that client. Make decisions objectively, not with respect to loyalty to your boss, objectively. Exercising due care, so do a good job, right? You have to go on. This is how Madoff was able to get away with his scheme for so long. The auditor didn't audit the financial statements, didn't exercise due care. Actually didn't exercise any care. All right, so this brings us to the AICPA Code of Conduct. So, as we go throughout the semester, we'll talk more and more about codes of conduct and things that are specific to accountants, but we're just going to introduce you here to one accounting code of conduct, which is the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. Right? So AICPA has an ethics code. They call it their code of conduct. It's divided into two sections, principles and rules. Right? So as you start to look at this, we've already talked about virtues and we've already talked about laws, right? And I think you might see how the AICPA code of conduct has risen from virtue ethics and from laws into what we have here. The code has principles, right, which are aspirational, right? A good ethical accountant has integrity. A good ethical accountant is objective, is independent of the client, exercises due professional care, right? So these are principles. Rules, that's something enforceable. That's how we enforce the principles. So if my goal, right, is to be an independent accountant who doesn't do what my client tells me, I do what's best for the public interest, right? Then there's going to be a rule that says something, like a rule about independence would be if you are auditing a public company, you're not allowed to own stock in that public company. That's a rule that keeps you independent, preserves your integrity, provides for the public interest, right? So there's these goals, these aspirations that we think are great, and then there's some rules. So as we go throughout the semester, we'll learn this, but you can see how the rules arise from the principles, and these arise pretty much from what I would call our values, right? These are our values as accountants. The overriding responsibility for accountants is use your professional and moral judgments in all activities. Recognize your primary responsibility is to the public, and use that responsibility to the public to best serve your client and your employer, right? So even though somebody's hired you to do an audit for her, your employer hired you to do their taxes, you still owe your responsibility to the public. And you have to continue to improve yourself. You have to stay competent. The laws change, the rules change. You need to keep up with that. So you are required to use professional moral judgment, recognize your duty to the public, and continue to keep updated. That's your responsibilities as an accountant. And you'll see that our ethical obligations, right, tie to the virtues we've learned about, the values we've learned about already back in our philosophy classes. Here are Aristotle's virtues, and you can see that they do relate to the ethical standards we use for CPAs. Some of the chapter goes on to discuss things that have happened since Greek philosophy came up. We'll look at a few of those just so that you understand them. Yes, some of this sometimes does come up on the CPA exam. So let's talk a little bit about teleology, deontology, virtue, and justice. All right. So as philosophy evolved, there have evolved some different branches of how to look at ethics, right? Teleology is a branch of ethics that looks at the outcome, all right? So teleology basically is looking at the result of your ethical decision. Deontology is about duties, all right? So you don't think about the outcome. There's just like a right thing to do. and you don't worry about the outcome of that thing. And virtue, we'll talk about that again. We've already have talked about it a little bit, and justice, we've talked about that a little bit. We'll talk about it some more. So teleology means you're going to think about the outcome in making your moral decision. All right. So one way to think about your outcome, right, is egoism, right? So when I choose this thing, what are the consequences for me? If I'm an egoist, right, just like that word ego, like you understand it from Freud, ego is all about me. And what are the consequences for me, the decision maker, right? If I have an ethical decision to make, I make it in light of what's going to be what I consider best for me. Do the act that promotes the greatest good for oneself. I kind of think about Adam Smith and the free market. Everybody's out there doing what's best for him or herself, and we end up with this robust economy, allegedly. So egoism, I'm going to do what's best for me. That's it. The outcome that's best for me, however I get there, I don't care. Enlightened egoists does allow for others sometimes. All right? But my self-interest still remains paramount. So what I mean by that is maybe I see the CFO is going to fudge the financial statements. So I go, well, I like the CFO. You know, if I let her get away with that, maybe that'd be good for me. You know, maybe I get a raise. You know, that'd be great. So maybe I would decide, yeah, I think I'll let the CFO get away with fudging that because it's going to be good for me, right? So that's egoism. Enlightened egoist might say, well, if other people find out about that, or they lose some money because of it, and I don't tell, then I'd probably lose my job, or gosh, if it's fraud, right? If I'm helping that CFO commit fraud, I could even go to jail. I sure don't want that, right? So I'm not really thinking about the others that much, except for what's going to help me keep my ultimate goal for me, right? I mean, yeah, others are going to be mad at me if I let the CFO get away with that, so I won't do it. Right, so self-interest still is important. So teleologically speaking, it's about the outcomes. For egoism and enlightened egoism, it's about the outcome for the decider. Utilitarianism is going to go, seems a little more ethical, all right? So Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill are a couple of great philosophers. If you have had philosophy, you've probably heard about utilitarianism, right? Immanuel Kant, something like that. Bentham and Mill actually say that you should pick the greatest good for the most people, right? So in making your moral decision, you're gonna say, okay, who are all my stakeholders? How, if I choose this, what's gonna happen to all these stakeholders? All right, so how can I get the greatest good for the greatest number? Now here's the problem with that. It's impossible to foresee all the consequences, and the consequences are difficult to measure. So I can try to pick the greatest good, and who defines what good is, right? Me, the decider, right? So it sounds good, sounds like I'm being empathetic to other stakeholders, but you certainly can't, you don't have a crystal ball, you don't know what's going to happen. So that makes utilitarianism, well, problematic as far as a system for making ethical choices. All right. Plus, if I'm being a utilitarian, how do I apply my greatest good? Right? Do I do it by act? Right? In other words, yes, there's rules, but for this one time, I can set aside that rule because it's going to increase the greatest good. Right? Or do I do it based on rules? Rule utilitarianism. All right? I set up a rule that promotes the greatest good. And that is going to maximize value for everybody in theory. All right. So do I set up this one-time rule, or do I do a decision each and every time? Which brings us to deontology. So all of these, egoism, enlightened egoism, utilitarianism, subdivided into act and rule utilitarian, all are predicated on deciding an outcome and picking the best outcome. Under egoism, best outcome for the decider. Under utilitarianism, the best good for everybody. But still, you look at the outcome and you pick the outcome. Right? Deontology doesn't care about the outcome. All right? Under deontology, we're looking at your duty. Right? There are some norms, and you do your duty according to the norm. And it's based on rights rather than consequences. Right? So the rule is don't lie. The rule is don't steal. Right? That's it. You don't have to decide about any impact for anybody. The rule is don't falsify revenue on a financial statement. That's it. Don't have to think any further than that. There's a rule. It's your duty to follow the rule. All right. Certainly Hobbes, Locke, Immanuel Kant talked about the rights principles. Kant's the fellow who came up with this categorical imperative, which again is related to duty. People have rights. You have to respect the rights. You have rights. Other people have to respect your rights. You're motivated by your duty, your sense of obligation to do a moral thing. Here's the problem. This rights principles, this idea, this deontology requires moral absolutes, and there's no clear way to resolve conflicts between moral duties. Right? So, you can't steal, but can I steal bread to feed the starving child? Right? How do you conflict that? I certainly have a moral duty to feed starving children. Right? But I also have a moral duty to not steal. What do I do? Right, so deontology, the rights principles, they're not exactly perfect either. All right? This idea of justice, there are everybody has a certain amount of liberty and rights as long as they're compatible with others. I always think of that phrase, my rights end where yours begin, your rights end where mine begin. So everything is fair. It's about everybody being treated equally. However, there can also be issues with this. It's impossible to come up with procedures that benefit all. Virtue ethics. We talked a little bit about this already, Plato and Aristotle, this idea of there are virtues, right? So I don't have to learn so many rules as I have to develop good character, right? So if I become a person of good character, right, and I possess these virtues, what I do is therefore moral, right? So Plato and Aristotle said, if you're a person who is wise, brave, temperate, and fair, you make good decisions about ethics. Other important ethics: fortitude, generosity, self-respect, good temper, and sincerity. And of course there's some bad character traits. That's my dog. He's kind of coughing. Who knows, they may start barking in a little while here. Alright. bad character traits called vices, right? According to Plato and Aristotle, insensibility, injustice, vanity, and cowardice, those are some vices. All right, so in accounting practice, we've already talked about virtues, right? It's sort of where our principles come from, right? We want to be independent, we want to have integrity, we want to exercise due professional care. Those are accounting virtues. When you really think about it, our ethical obligations are to clients, employers, government, and the public at large. So therefore, our virtues would be perform services without bias, avoid conflict of interest, be independent, have integrity. Integrity means you act from moral principle, not expediency. You don't let loyalty cloud good judgment. Right? So I'm not acting based on what I want. I'm not even acting based on what my client wants. I'm acting based on moral principles. For accountants, they are no bias, no conflicts of interest, independent, and integrity. So, in this class, we're going to be working on coming up with the moral point of view. So we're going to talk about a lot of cases, we're going to do outlines for cases, we're going to do case briefs, we're going to think about cases, right? So the point of this class is to leave here with some critical thinking skills, all right? We are going to learn how to look at things with a moral point of view. It's going to emphasize reason and rational choice, deliberation, which includes reason, thought, and it's voluntary. I'm going to choose an action. I'm going to reason it out and choose an action. Ends do not justify the means. So, in other words, teleology doesn't apply, right? I've got to apply reasoning, critical thinking skills, as we like to call them in college, and come up with a choice of action. Personal integrity, essential for CPAs. We are going to learn to be ethical, right? By practice, by exercising virtues to lead a life of excellence. Not all accountants are CPAs. In this textbook, we're also going to talk about management accountants. I'm going to talk a lot about auditors. I myself am an internal auditor, a member of the Institute of Internal Auditors. I'm a CIA. I'm also a certified fraud examiner, which is a member of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. So all different branches of accountants have ethics, but they still are going to have principles. They may not explicitly state them, but all the different branches of accounting, whether you become an enrolled agent and do taxes, whether you become a certified fraud examiner and go around examining frauds, whether you're an auditor, you're going to have principles, which would be your virtues, what you aspire to. So management accountants, their principles are honesty, fairness, objectivity, and responsibility. Standards are how they apply these, and they resolve ethical situations. In classes, normally we'll talk about cases, but we're going to not talk about did you print for this case because we can't really discuss it. But what I would like for you to do before the next class is come out, either if you don't have Chapter 1 already, come out here to Chapter 1 in Blackboard and read Case 1.1. Alright, it's the Harvard cheating scandal. Also, I want you to do an outline. Alright, so out here in assignments, you will find case outlines and a template. So for that Case 1.1, the Harvard cheating scandal, I want you to fill out a case template. So here you go. Name 2 stakeholders in the case. Describe an area where you see there's an ethical dilemma or a choice. describe a method, rule, or example from the chapter, think of a possible outcome, describe how the outcome affects one of the stakeholders. So you don't have to answer the questions at the end of the chapter. You can if you want. What we're going to do when we come to class on Monday the 25th is discuss that Harvard case and anything else you want to clear up from the chapter. So fill this out, put your name and the case name, print it out and bring it to class. To get credit for the case outline, you need to print it and bring it to class and turn it in. All right. Have a great weekend. I will see you Monday.